Are you familiar with the human flower? This grim practice involves embedding seeds within the torso of a girl, from whom all limbs have been excised. These seeds feed voraciously on the girl's blood and flesh. When the seeds finally bloom, they erupt from beneath the surface of the girl's skin. Legends claim that those who consume the human flower are cured of all ailments and achieve eternal life. My own sister was made into a human flower. My sister and I emerged into the world within a household profoundly biased in favor of sons over daughters. Yet our experiences diverged starkly. She luxuriated in milk baths daily, and the food she enjoyed was lovingly crafted by our mother. Once, when I dared to reach for food from her bowl, I was met with a fierce slap from my mother. "You think you're worthy of this?" she demanded icily. I spent my days toiling in the fields, my skin once pale, now darkened and roughened by endless days under the sun. Meanwhile, my sister's skin remained exquisitely soft, smooth as polished tofu. Each touch of her skin filled me with a deep envy. Standing tall in her beautiful garments, she could have been mistaken for one of those sophisticated city girls. Even our father, known for his sour disposition, showered her with adoration. All because she was the treasured daughter. In our village, the human flower maiden is held in the highest esteem. Legends purport that only those female infants touched by celestial grace are destined to become human flowers. Elders in the village whisper tales of these maidens, who not only live unusually long lives but also preserve the visage of youth eternally. There were times when such tales filled me with a profound envy. Yet fate decreed that I would never become one of these revered maidens. By the customs of our village, every newborn girl is carried into the chief's chamber by her parents. During this sacred ritual, not even the parents may cross the threshold. In about 10 minutes, the village chief will emerge, carrying the baby girl. Should a delicate pink flower pattern appear on her shoulder, it will mark her as the chosen person-flower girl. I once went to complain bitterly to Grandma's son, our neighbor, but all she did was pat my head and smile enigmatically. "Xiaoyang, you may not appreciate it now, but one day you'll see the truth. It was your sister who shielded you from misfortune. Do not bear any ill will toward her. She is truly your savior. This village has forsaken all decency. I'm leaving first thing tomorrow, escaping this place." Initially, Grandma's son's words baffled me. It wasn't until later that night, caught between sleep and wakefulness, that I saw her carry my soundly sleeping sister outside. I quietly followed them. My sister was taken into a shrine hall. Within the shadowy confines of the ancestral hall, a gathering of village elders, respected and eminent, stood solemnly. Among them was the village head. My parents were there too. The hall's light, dim and somber, bathed the space in a faint, otherworldly red glow. Grandma removed the clothes from her sister's body. The next moment, she shoved some black seed between sister's legs. I crouched fearfully in a corner, my hand pressed tightly over my mouth. The seeds, unervingly, began to stir on their own. Oblivious to it all, my sister slept deeply, untouched by the night's eerie developments. Around her, everyone knelt in a solemn circle. Then came the moment of sheer terror. An uncle stepped forward, a dark, ominous box in his hands. Upon opening the box, a startling sight met my eyes. A young girl was tucked inside. Curled up, she had no limbs, only a torso. Yet, unmistakably, she was alive. Her faint moans filled the air. The most unnerving moment came with a sharp pop. From her eyeball, a flower, tangled in mucus and blood, forced its way out. The pain caused her to convulse violently. My grandmother advanced and ruthlessly extracted the flower at its root. The girl let out a piercing scream of agony and succumbed to unconsciousness. Soaked in sweat and overcome with dread, I clutched my mouth closed. In the faint light, I could see her skin festooned with bizarrely colored flowers. Grandma presented a fresh flower to an elderly village man I knew, recently diagnosed with terminal cancer. He trembled as he quickly stuffed the flower into his parched mouth and started chewing. The sound was disturbingly eerie. Though it was clearly a flower, It sounded gruesomely like the mastication of sticky flesh. Then, in an astounding moment, he transformed from a frail, white-haired elder into a strong, middle-aged man with lush black hair. Panic seized me, causing my body to quake and a scream to escape my lips. They all turned their heads in an instant, a multitude of eyes fixed unblinkingly on me. Desperate to flee, terror rooted me to the spot, and I slumped to the ground, immobile. My father grimly grasped an axe and advanced toward me step by step. Overcome by fear, my vision blurred, and I lost consciousness. When consciousness returned, I was on a straw mat at home. I was jolted awake by my little brother, who was mischievously spraying water at my eyes with his water gun. Giggling, "I'll blind you!" I shoved him away. He tumbled to the ground, crying out loudly. Without a word, my mother charged in with a broom and began to strike me. "Why is your brother crying? As the older sister, shouldn't you be more patient with him?" I ached from the beating, yet my eyes remained locked on my mother's face, searching for any hint of something wrong. Her expression was fierce, typical of her, yet nothing seemed out of the ordinary. "Mom, about yesterday," I began cautiously. "You even dare to mention it? You were screaming inexplicably in the middle of the night." Mom snapped back. Her words provided some relief. Had yesterday merely been a nightmare? I breathed out, comforting myself with the thought that it must have been a bad dream. After all, how could such bizarre events actually happen? Just then, my sister awoke. Cradling her stomach, she winced. "Mom, my stomach hurts terribly." Mom approached with a worried look and started soothing her belly. "It might just be the cold. Perhaps you kicked off your blankets last night and caught a chill." As I observed my sister's pallid face, flashes of last night's horror lingered in my mind. Suddenly, I saw her stomach twitch as though something inside it stirred. I blinked hard, and when I looked again, all was still. Overwhelmed with unease, I ran off to find Grandma's son. I swung open her door to a hauntingly silent yard. Her words echoed in my mind. She was leaving the village. Softly, I called out for Grandma's son. Then, a noise caught my attention. I rushed to her room and pushed the door open. There she was, lying on her bed amidst a chaos of clothes. I was about to speak when the sight of her struck me into silence. Her fingers were gone, as if meticulously amputated. Her face was hauntingly pale as she frantically shook her head at me. With trembling legs, I moved closer. She grabbed my hand abruptly. Opening her mouth, I saw her tongue was also missing. A gasp escaped me and I almost fell. Suddenly, Grandma's son's eyes darted past me in terror. Turning around, I saw my father standing ominously behind us, clutching a shovel. "You skipped out on work to hide here," he accused. "Dad, Grandma's son. She..." I gestured desperately towards her. "We need to get her to the hospital immediately." But before I could finish, dizziness overwhelmed me, blurring my father's figure. Through the fog, I saw him approaching Grandma's son with the shovel. I tried to protest, but the world spun violently, and darkness overtook me. When awareness returned, I was sitting in the courtyard of our house. My mother approached with a bundle of clothes and tossed them at my feet. "Wash these, and no lunch until they're clean," she declared. Confused, I wondered how I had abruptly returned from Grandma's son's to our own courtyard. "Why are you staring? Get to washing and cut out the laziness," she snapped. "Mom, about Grandma's son. That old lady next door was just taken by her family. She's fortunate. Her son and daughter-in-law bought a spacious house in the city," she said, her voice tinged with envy. "Sons are invaluable, while daughters are merely financial burdens." Seizing a moment of her distraction, I darted away. "Where are you running off to, you brat?" she bellowed after me. Ignoring her, I raced back to Grandma's son's house. As expected, her room was empty. Various garments were strewn across the floor, including one very familiar to me. It was the dress Grandma's son wore on her wedding day, which she had described with a face radiant with joy. Clearly, she would never leave it behind. After a thorough search, I found a crumpled note beneath the bed. Carefully unfolding it, I read, "Trust no one in the village. They are all monsters masquerading in human guise." The words on the note had left me trembling with fear. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside. I hastily threw the note back where it had been. My father stormed in, his face dark with anger. "You're completely out of control. Even lazy with simple chores like washing clothes. You won't eat today." He seized me by the collar and dragged me outside. I screamed at the top of my lungs. Everything I saw yesterday was real. Those flowers are growing from people. You're endangering my sister. To my surprise, my father looked at me oddly. "Have you gone mad? You don't actually think that the flowers grow directly from the flower women, do you? I don't know what nonsense you're filling your head with. The flower women cultivate the flowers." Seeing my disbelief, he gruffly said he'd show me something and led me to the ancestral hall we visited last night. My heart thudded violently as we approached, dreading another encounter with the night's terrors. Next to the hall was a field. There stood a figure. It was the village chief. He saw me and beamed. "Little Yong, welcome." I eyed him with suspicion. I had once deeply respected the village chief, one of the few in the village who had shown me kindness. Yet I had seen him inside the ancestral hall just yesterday. "This girl insists that flowers are sprouting directly from people, as if she's been kicked in the head by a donkey," he exclaimed, pointing towards a field where flowers sparsely bloomed. Those were the very flowers I witnessed last night. Then, astonishingly, the limbless girl I had seen the previous evening walked out from the ancestral hall. She offered me a small smile before she began watering the plants, a sight that left me utterly astonished. Her exposed skin was flawlessly smooth, completely free of any flowers, and her limbs were intact, down to her hands and feet. Her eyes were also unblemished. The village chief chuckled upon hearing this. "It's not Yang's fault. She deserves to know our village's secret." He then unfolded the story of the flower people to me. On the day of their first menstruation, selected girls become flower women and make their way to the ancestral hall. Their lifelong duty is to nurture these flowers in the fields. These blossoms hold the power to cure any illness and even restore youth. However, they are not meant for just anyone's consumption. Only those suffering from terminal diseases or severe injuries qualify. Something still felt wrong as I processed his words. If the flower people were simply human cultivated, why did Grandma's son resist so vehemently? She had even left behind that foreboding message. Yet, there she was, the girl blossoming with flowers very much alive and real, right before my eyes. I yearned to ask more, but my father abruptly tugged me away. "That's enough. I brought you here specially. Now, back to work." I reluctantly followed him home. Suddenly, I caught a fleeting glimpse of something black swirling in his eyes, but it disappeared just as quickly. I looked back. The village chief remained there. Our eyes met and he offered me a slight smile. Yet, something unsettling nagged at me. Instinctively, I looked downward and a chill ran through me. There was something profoundly wrong with the village chief's shadow. He was a slight old man. Yet, his shadow was unnaturally large and it moved. That mere glimpse sent a shiver down my spine, and I turned away, heart racing. When I reached home, I found my mother and grandmother gently cleaning my sister. Fresh from a milk bath, she radiated a soft, milky scent, a stark contrast to my sweaty, dirt-streaked appearance. But any envy was gone, replaced by an acute concern for her safety. My sister, noticing my intense gaze, proudly tilted her head and gave a smug smile. "Sister, I know you crave the milk, and it'd be such a waste to throw the leftovers away. Come, take a sip." Previously, my mother preferred to lavish the milk on my sister's baths rather than let me have a single sip. The disdain my family showed me was palpable, and my little sister, mimicking their behavior, began to lord over me. Although I once harbored mild resentment towards her, now my heart was filled only with anxiety. Rooted in place, I watched as my sister coldly huffed and turned to accept what our mother handed her. A gruesomely blood-drenched pig's heart. The heart was unmistakably raw, its steam carrying the scent of fresh blood, clearly just removed. She gobbled down the heart with ferocious appetite. Both my mother and grandmother watched her with a disturbingly intense adoration. "Eat up, darling. If it's not enough, I'll slaughter more pigs. We need R&I to transform into a flower person soon." I stood frozen, terror rendering me mute. My sister then clutched at her stomach, suddenly groaning in discomfort. Almost immediately, blood began seeping from between her legs. My grandmother and mother were overjoyed. The first menstruation. Yao is destined to be a flower person now. Pride flushed my sister's cheeks as she threw a smug glance my way. Yet, I was swamped by a profound unease. At bedtime, my mother offered me a glass of milk, an unprecedented gesture. "You've been looking frail. Drink this to strengthen yourself." Reluctant yet coerced by her intense gaze, I drank. Despite my reservations, I drank it down. My mother's face lit up with satisfaction before she turned and departed. No sooner had she left than I bolted to the bathroom to vomit. In the stillness of the night, as I hovered on the edge of sleep, a disturbance outside stirred me to alertness. I sprang up and nudged the door open just enough to peer through. Shrouded in shadow, I saw my father gently carrying my sleeping sister away. My mother and grandmother were trailing behind him. A wave of anxiety washed over me, causing me to break into a cold sweat. But at that moment, an ill-timed growl from my stomach echoed loudly. 3 pairs of eyes swiftly turned in the dark. Thankfully, my quick withdrawal saved me. I scurried back to bed, pulled the covers over myself, and feigned sleep. At that moment, the door creaked open. I heard footsteps as someone entered. I bit my lip, my skin cold and clammy with sweat, as I struggled to suppress my shivering. Someone paused beside my bed. Head bowed. They peered at me, mere inches away. Their breath was warm on my cheek. They seemed to be gauging whether I was truly asleep. My back was slick with sweat, and despite my efforts, my eyelids twitched uncontrollably. Just as I was about to succumb, my grandmother's voice cut through the tension. "Enough, stop looking at her." The milk she drank was laced with enough sedatives to down a cow. Then my father chimed in. "You're right. That stubborn girl caught us performing the ritual last time. We managed to fool her today, but I'm not convinced she's entirely oblivious. Rest assured, she's not too bright. After she collapsed last night, I made sure she ingested plenty of drugs." My mother commented coolly. "The concoctions prepared by the village chief are strong enough to trigger hallucinations. After witnessing the peony woman so clearly during the day, she's unlikely to harbor many suspicions. We must hasten to the temple. This unfortunate girl's days are numbered. And after all, the full bloom of a human flower requires proper nourishment." These words sent me spiraling into a vortex of dread. Only after the sound of their footsteps faded did I dare to open my eyes. The visions of the day had been illusions. The horrors of the previous night were painfully real. Unbeknownst to me, my mother had dosed me while I was unconscious. I quickly made my way to the temple. The temple was bustling with villagers. At the forefront, the village chief proudly lifted my sister overhead. And behind him, the ominous black box harboring the young girl. "We are on the cusp of welcoming a new human flower. Praise be to the heavens for their gifts." All present knelt, joined hands, bodies rocking, murmuring in tongues foreign to my ears. Then my father rose and unlatched the box. From within, a harsh odor permeated the air, even reaching my hidden corner. From the box, the stifled sobs of the girl resonated, her eyes wide with dread as they met the crowd's gaze. She was still alive, yet her left eye was grotesquely disfigured. The village chief reverently kissed her forehead. "Thank you for your sacrifices. Without these flower women, our village would have vanished 3 decades ago." The girl trembled with fear, her whispers barely audible. "Grandfather, please, let me go. I'm in so much pain, every day." The village chief gently stroked her head with a look of compassion. I noticed the flowers on her beginning to wilt, each drooping sadly. Abruptly, the village chief produced a long knife, slashing the girl's throat swiftly. I muffled my scream with my hand, aghast at the carnage unfolding before me. The girl convulsed violently, reminiscent of a fish on a butcher's block. Grandmother fetched a basin, capturing the blood spurting from the girl's neck with clinical detachment. The girl eventually went still, her lifeless body crumpled in the box. Quietly, I lifted my phone and recorded the macabre scene. My phone, an old model found near our village entrance without a SIM card, might be crucial if I managed to escape. It would be key evidence for the authorities. With the basin of blood in her hands, my grandmother approached my sister. She raised the vessel aloft, cascading blood over my sister. My sister's slight form quickly turned crimson, yet she remained still and unawake. Watching in horror, I began to fear that my sister might have been drugged too. Today, Xiao Yao has reached her menarche, a sign she's maturing. Her body can now supply the nutrients needed for the human flower, but it still requires more fertilizer. Suddenly, my grandmother's eyes flicked towards where I was hiding. Panic surged through me. Was I discovered? But then I exhaled in relief. It was just a fleeting look. At that moment, several of my uncles came in with a sack. Unveiling the sack, it revealed Granny Sun, who had vanished. Granny Sun's expression was one of stark terror. Granny Sun, my father said, despite being much younger. A realization struck me. Could my father have consumed the human flower too? Tears ran down Granny Sun's face as she implored them for mercy. Granny Sun, we had intended to spare you, my father sighed. 30 years ago, your sister was transformed into the human flower. As her younger sister, you were destined to become the fertilizer. But your father couldn't bear the thought. He insisted on becoming the fertilizer himself. He was my loyal brother, and honoring my promise to him, I spared you. But leaving the village and intending to divulge our secret was a grave mistake. Should outsiders uncover the truth about our village, they would certainly come to seize our invaluable human flower. My father's expression grew stern. It's been 30 years, and while you're not as potent a fertilizer as Xiaoyang, you still have your uses. After the crowd recited that haunting chant, my father advanced towards Granny Sun with the knife. Powerless, I closed my eyes, unable to witness the grim act that was about to unfold. Granny Sun's screams nearly shattered my eardrums, lasting an excruciating 5 minutes before silencing. With trepidation, I opened my eyes. What remained of Granny Sun was a mangled mess. Yet, my father's face bore an air of detachment. He wiped his hands and said to the village chief, "Chun, throw her into the weed cutter." Indeed, my father had partaken of the human flower. He was even older than the village chief. I struggled to grasp the full extent of his longevity. Once more, Granny Sun's body was removed, but the acrid smell of blood hung thick in the air. Shortly thereafter, the noise of the weed cutter churned outside. Soon, an uncle entered, bearing a basin of minced remains. As he walked by, I nearly retched. My mother seized chunks of flesh and shoved them into my sister's mouth. Though unconscious, my sister's body instinctively chewed. The sound of crunching resonated in the quiet temple. Soon, a chilling spectacle unfolded. Beneath my sister's skin, something began to pulse. It pushed her skin upwards until, with a soft pop, a green sprout pierced through, smeared with blood. A flower quickly unfurled on the sprout. The crowd erupted in jubilant cheers. Xiao Yao, as a flower woman, is nearing maturity. She now needs better flesh and blood as fertilizer, the village chief announced, his face flush with excitement. A cold dread washed over me, because I knew that the fertilizer he mentioned was me. At that moment, my grandmother carefully asked, "May I eat the flower now? I suffer from severe diabetes and don't have much longer." Her gaze fixed on the human flower sprouting from my sister. She swallowed repeatedly. My father glanced at my grandmother and nodded. Like a ravenous wolf, my grandmother lunged at my sister. She brutally tore the human flower from my sister's body. The human flower was violently torn away, skin and flesh clinging to it, as blood splattered. Clearly heavily sedated, My sister remained unresponsive. Grandmother quickly gobbled it down, as if wary of anyone trying to steal it from her. After consuming the human flower, she transformed back to her middle-aged self. She moved toward my father, nestling into his arms with evident joy. "Husband, I have regained my youth. I can now stay by your side forever." My mother watched with a frosty demeanor, clearly displeased. I observed them in shock. It suddenly made sense why my father and grandmother shared no resemblance. And I had never seen any photographs of my grandfather at home. It turns out she wasn't my grandmother at all. She was actually my father's first wife. She had not been gravely ill previously, hence had never ingested a human flower. "All right, everyone return home. Tomorrow night we will witness the full maturation of the human flower," the village chief declared to the assembly. Realizing their imminent departure, I hurriedly lay down to crawl away. "Xiaoyang, you've been hiding so long. You must be weary." I suddenly heard the village chief's voice, tinged with amusement. I looked up sharply, meeting his grotesquely wide smile. With a shriek, I jumped up and raced forward into the haunting silence of the road. I couldn't stop running until I reached the village entrance. I had to escape and alert the police, or I would meet the same fate as Granny's son. Behind me, the sound of hurried footsteps filled the air. They were catching up. I could hear my father cursing in the background. He kept insisting that what I saw was merely a hallucination. But he couldn't fool me any longer. Suddenly, I tripped over something beneath me. Glancing down in terror, I saw a head emerging from the muddy earth. It was the head of the deceased flower woman. From her eyes sprouted numerous flower stems that quickly wrapped around my legs. Desperately, I tore at the stems. As I pulled the flower stems free, crushing them, they leaked fresh, red blood, as if they were not plants at all. Just as the footsteps neared, I finally broke free. With every ounce of strength, I dashed towards the village entrance. Suddenly, the headlights of a nearby car caught my eye. I ran towards it, driven by adrenaline, and stopped right in front of it, relieved to find it was a police car. The driver, a uniformed female police officer, braked suddenly and stared at me in surprise. "Help me!" I shouted to her. Perhaps deterred by the presence of the police, I noticed that my father and the others had not ventured beyond the village. I managed to get into the police car successfully. The female officer handed me a cup of water and wrapped her jacket around my shoulders. I promptly showed her the video I had captured on my phone. Her expression grew serious. "I understand," she said. "Rest for now. I'll take you straight to the city. I'll call my colleagues immediately to help rescue your sister." Her words allowed me to relax slightly. The car sped onwards, putting distance between us and the village. Suddenly, an inadvertent glance at the rearview mirror caught my eye. Our eyes locked through the mirror. She was staring intently at me, her eyes wide. I immediately sensed something was off. But by the time I thought to escape, it was too late. There was something wrong with the water I had drunk. I should have known. Considering our village's remoteness, how could there possibly be a police car nearby? But by then, it was too late for regrets. The policewoman's smile grew more pronounced, and I felt the car turning back towards the village. Desperation overwhelmed me. I could only watch in despair as we returned to the village. The policewoman exited the car. My father approached her, affectionately patting her head. "Well done, my daughter," he praised. I was locked inside the house, my limbs bound with iron chains. My sister arrived with a tray of food. I implored her earnestly to set me free. Her response was cold and detached. "Mom labels you as mentally ill. We cannot let you out. If you remain here, we're both doomed tonight. You'll be dismembered, confined to a box for life, and eventually used as fodder for the new human flower. I've got video proof on my phone. One glance and you'd understand." Yet my sister merely sneered. "I doubt the rantings of the insane. Perhaps, sister, you're just jealous I've become the human flower. Currently, I'm the only girl in the village granted this fate." She spun on her heel and departed. I watched in horror as her shadow expanded to twice her size, teeming with writhing forms. They seemed like burgeoning egg sacs. A ghastly pallor washed over my face. Helplessly, I watched her leave. What these ominous shapes in her shadow were, I could not say. Perhaps Grandma Sun was right. Beneath their human facades, the villagers were indeed monsters. Locked in for the entire day, I avoided the food scattered on the ground, fearful of its contents. My hunger stretched through the morning. As drowsiness overtook me, a distant voice called out my name. My eyes fluttered open to see Xiaotsue from our village scaling through the window. Xiaotsue, 2 years my senior, has always shared a cordial bond with me. She gasped upon seeing my condition and hurried to release me from the chains. Yet the chains, requiring a key and exceedingly durable, proved too much for Xiaotsue to handle alone. I was alerted by some noise last night and witnessed them locking you up here. They're labeling you as mentally ill, asserting that officials from the psychiatric hospital will retrieve you this evening. Still, I find it unthinkable. Your mental state being questioned just doesn't sit right with me. Xiaotsue cautiously surveyed her surroundings before handing me an aged notebook. This was entrusted to me by Grandma Sun the day before yesterday, she whispered. She wanted you to have it should she no longer be with us. I was momentarily stunned, hastily flipping it open. The pages were densely packed with Grandma Sun's distinctive handwriting. My father once confided that our village harbors a dark secret. The human flowers aren't cultivated by the human flower women. Rather, they sprout directly from their bodies. My father, the village medic, driven by a need to unravel this mystery, tested the blood of every village girl. He discovered that only those with Rh-negative blood were destined to become human flower women. My sister, chosen at birth to be one of them, was lavished with affection by the villagers, an affection I perceived as hollow. Any slight injury to her would prompt vilification of our family, with our every move meticulously scrutinized. Through my father's relentless investigation, the origin of the human flower women was finally unearthed. 50 years ago, a woman sought refuge in our village, claiming that foes were in pursuit. She needed to lie low for a while. Yet, there was something peculiar about her. She meticulously concealed her face, leaving only her eyes visible, and was cloaked in layers despite the summer heat. The villagers had implored her to stay, and at first, her relations with them flourished, until tragedy struck a villager's son. The playful boy had tumbled from a cliff and was found gasping for life. In a village where boys were precious and few, the community's grief was palpable. Moved by compassion and gratitude for their hospitality, the woman did something extraordinary. She unveiled her face, revealing it to be adorned with vibrant flowers. She shed her robe, revealing arms also blanketed in an array of exotic flowers. The sight terrified the villagers, yet the woman disclosed that these flowers had the power to resurrect the dying. With evident pain, she plucked one from her arm and fed it to the boy, sparking a miraculous turn of events. The boy's health swiftly rebounded. Initially, the villagers revered the woman as a savior, profoundly thankful for her presence. Whether faced with terminal illness or the twilight of life, the villagers sought her miracles. Those who partook of her floral essence not only reclaimed their health but rolled back the years. Yet, as her flowers dwindled to a mere 10, each removal inflicted terrible agony upon her. With every petal lost, the villagers' empathy seemed to fade, their gratitude turning to indifference. Eventually, someone spilled the secret of the woman. A wealthy man offered $1 million for the 10 remaining flowers, a staggering sum at the time. The villagers rushed to the woman, determined to seize her last blossoms. But the woman, terror-stricken, clutched at her flowers, vehemently shaking her head. "Do not pluck them. The flowers must not be consumed by those who are not grievously ill." Her weak defiance was no match for the villagers' rampant greed. Tragically, the woman was beaten to death. Unforeseen by the villagers, the flowers swiftly wilted with her passing. They buried her in haste, yet by the next day, the grave sprouted numerous peculiar seeds. These seeds exuded a sweet fragrance and even seemed to stir. Yielding to temptation, a young girl consumed one. From that moment, a second flower woman emerged. The villagers soon learned that only the gravely ill could safely consume these human flowers. For any healthy person, eating a flower meant an instant and fatal depletion of blood. For years, the villagers strictly adhered to this rule, never allowing the human flowers to spread beyond their village. I shuddered at the truth. Today, as my sister reached puberty, my fear deepened. She too was fated to become a flower woman. Yet the grim truth my father unearthed had one crucial omission: the actual process of a flower woman's maturation. It required the sacrifice of kin's flesh and blood. In this era, daughters are the least valued. Thus, I was inevitably chosen as the necessary sacrifice to hasten my sister's transformation. But our father intervened. He opted to take my place, to be the offering instead. Following his death, our mother descended into madness. My sister, limbs severed, was crafted into a flower woman. I cannot flee the village, for I know well that if I tried, Uncle Lou would certainly end my life. This journal's entries blur here, hard to decipher. But the text that follows is freshly inked, clearly added not long ago. I can no longer tolerate this village devoid of all decency. I must gamble on escape. Nevertheless, Grandma Sun's attempt to flee ultimately failed. Her notes stop abruptly with that sentence, her final words. After revealing the truth about the flower woman, Xiaotsue grasped my hand firmly. "I'll hide here, ready to ambush your father when he comes for you." She had procured a shovel from our house and now lay in ambush beneath my bed. At this moment, perhaps, I should appreciate the village's pervasive neglect of daughters. In our village, the girls, chronically undernourished, were always frail and slight. Xiaotsue, entirely hidden beneath the bed, curled into a ball. Our eyes met, hers alight with unwavering resolve. She nodded decisively. My eyes brimmed with tears, and I bit my lip to silence my cries. Finally, night descended. Father entered my room, his expression unusually kind, radiating a warmth I had never seen. "Xiaoyang, for years, I've wronged you. Go in peace. I will ensure you are buried with dignity." He unlocked the chain with a key. As he undid the chain completely, Xiaotsue stealthily slid out from under the bed. I engaged Father, distracting him. Pointing behind him, I shouted, "Sister has escaped." He instinctively turned. At that moment, Xiaotsue lunged, wielding the shovel, striking him fiercely across the face. Father let out a harrowing scream and fell, knocked out cold. Blood streamed from his head, his condition uncertain. I quickly clasped Xiaotsue's hand, planning our escape. But there were already noises outside, and the sound of my mother's voice. "Old Lou? What's going on?" She was heading towards my room. Panicked, Xiaotsue pushed me towards the window. "Run now. I'm not your sister's kin, so they won't harm me tonight." With gritted teeth, I vaulted through the window. This evening, the villagers had convened early at the ancestral hall. This left my path unobstructed. I sprinted with all my might toward the village's edge. My mother soon gave chase. As she ran, she cried out, "The fertilizer has escaped!" The sound of numerous footsteps thundered behind me. I didn't dare glance back, putting all my energy into moving forward. Even after I crossed the village boundary, the relentless pursuit continued. In a moment of panic, I noticed a narrow opening. I squeezed myself into it. The hole was grimy, reeking, with insects crawling over me at intervals. Enduring the discomfort, I remained utterly still. Where did that damn girl disappear to? My mother's voice, thick with fury and underlying fear, echoed nearby. "I've consumed the human flower. If we don't find her, you're next." My grandmother, or accurately, my father's first wife, remarked with a grim delight. At her words, my mother shrieked and searched more desperately. I curled up, holding my breath, utterly silent. Miraculously, I remained undiscovered. I heard my mother's screams as they dragged her off. She had replaced me as the sacrifice. And tonight, my sister was to reach her grim maturity. Only when the outside world fell silent did I dare emerge, trembling and brushing insects from my body. I fled blindly, not knowing the duration, until, on the brink of collapse, the outline of a police station emerged through the darkness. I darted inside, overwhelmed with relief, but then hesitated. What if that policewoman was here? At that moment, a male officer approached. "Young lady, what brings you here so late at night?" His gaze landed on my bare, battered feet. My feet bore the marks of my desperate flight. He immediately attended to my wounds with gentle care. Judging him to be kind, I quickly recounted the village's atrocities. The officer listened with patience, though his brow was knitted in doubt. I clutched at his uniform, tears finally overcoming me. "If you act now, you might still save my sister and Xiaotsue. They could still survive." Convinced by my plea, he assured me, "Stay here, you're safe. I'll lead a team to your village straight away." That night, I lay wide-eyed, unable to sleep, consumed by fear and hope. As dawn approached, I saw them returning. A frail figure was among them. It was Xiaotsue. "Xiaotsue!" I cried out with joy. Xiaotsue shared my excitement. We held each other, tears wetting our cheeks. After releasing Xiaotsue, I searched desperately for any trace of my sister, but she was absent. I feared the worst. The officer reported that upon their arrival in the village, they found no survivors other than Xiaotsue. Everyone, including my parents, had perished inside the ancestral hall. Their deaths were grotesque. They had been drained of all blood, yet not a single wound marred their bodies. It was as if the blood had mysteriously evaporated from within. I recalled Grandma Sun's words about the dire fate of the healthy who ingested the human flower. Why, then, knowing the lethal outcome, had they ingested it so recklessly? And how had those who had already eaten it met their ends? Doubt clouded my thoughts. The officer added, "We found no trace of your sister in the ancestral hall. However, we did find the severed hands and feet of a girl. If you can bear it." He paused, his expression somber, before he reluctantly handed me a photograph. "I'm not scared," I whispered. The photo showed 4 blood-drenched limbs. I immediately recognized them as my sisters, distinguished by a vivid red mole. "Officer, is it possible for someone to survive after losing their hands and feet?" I inquired, holding on to the faintest hope. The officer responded with a heavy heart. "Normally, such loss results in death from too much blood loss." I was filled with a deep sense of loss. My feelings for my sister were complex. Although our relationship had never been strong and she often treated me poorly, she was still an unwitting victim. Xiaotsue, sensing my grief, let me rest my head on her shoulder. Unknown to me, a small green sprout silently emerged from her chest. Special report on the DeVillage virus. 1 week prior, all residents of DeVillage perished under enigmatic circumstances. The only survivors were a 14-year-old girl, Lu Yang, and 17-year-old Su Chui. From our investigation in the village combined with insights from Lu Yang's notes, we concluded that the so-called human flowers of DeVillage are a type of viral entity. These human flowers are not botanical but rather belong to a class of insect-like organisms. Placing a desiccated human flower under the microscope revealed numerous tightly clustered insect bodies. The so-called human flower seeds we uncovered are, in fact, insect-like entities. This aligns with Lu Yang's observations of the seeds exhibiting mobility. They are decidedly not plants. Truthfully, when Lu Yang recounted how the villagers had inserted these entities into the bodies of girls, a chill ran through me. Moreover, these insects are carriers of an unidentified virus. Believed to be a relic from the Ice Age, this previously unknown virus is profoundly ancient. The seeds of the human flower are actually the eggs of these entities, incapable of maturing independently. If left exposed to air, they perish within a week. Conversely, the human body provides an optimal environment for these insects to flourish. Our studies have shown that only females with Rh-negative blood can successfully incubate these eggs, contributing to the scarcity of human flower women. Successful parasitization results in distinctive patterns emerging on the host's shoulders. As the eggs mature into adulthood, they burrow out of the host, To my astonishment, these creatures exhibit a rudimentary form of consciousness. Adult insects cannot sustain long-term coexistence within a single human host. They seek new hosts. Curiously, healthy individuals cannot sustain these parasites. Upon entering, the insects quickly deplete the host's blood, yet they too fail to survive once the host expires. Curiously, when individuals suffer from severe illnesses or are near death, their bodies produce a unique type of cell that acts as perfect sustenance for parasites. These parasites absorb the cells, continuing their growth within the host and inducing effects that mimic rejuvenation and the illusion of health recovery. The limbs that regenerate after consuming the human flowers are not the original appendages of the host but fabrications crafted by the parasitic entities. The hosts exhibit two distinct phenomena. First, their shadows are magnified to twice their actual size. Second, their eyes show moving black spots, which are actually the parasites navigating. Our studies have revealed that these parasites have been undergoing evolution over the years. They live in symbiosis with the host's brain, adopting the host's memories, and are progressively evolving towards greater intelligence. Eventually, they might usurp the host's brain functions. My research mentor noted our fortune that all the human flowers have expired, preventing these creatures from evolving further and averting potential irreversible catastrophes globally. I am profoundly relieved. Let this calamity die with the village. 3 days later, I revisited Lu Yang and Su Chui. They had found a new home with an affluent family. Seeing me again brought joy to both Lu Yang and Su Chui. They had visibly put on a substantial amount of weight since my last visit. I was sincerely delighted for them. Su Chui handed me a cup of hot tea. She smiled as I drank, then suddenly posed a question. "Brother, do you truly believe that all the human flowers have been eradicated?" I nodded in affirmation. She relaxed only then. As I prepared to depart, Su Chui walked me to the door. "Brother, is it conceivable that among the human flowers, there exists a supremely powerful matriarch? One that has been evolving by absorbing her offspring, capable of surviving within the bodies of healthy humans?" I was momentarily stunned by her query. The village virus was a tightly held secret of our research institute. How did Su Chui come to know of it? Yet she quickly laughed again. "Look at how serious you've become." I was just teasing. "I've been immersed in sci-fi novels lately." Su Chui playfully stuck out her tongue. Relieved, I bid her goodbye. However, as I drifted in thought, I suddenly recalled the hot tea I had just consumed. It seemed a black speck had momentarily flickered through it.